Lily had always dreamed of her wedding day. At 23, she was young, bright, and hopeful, ready to start a new chapter with the man she loved more than anything, Daniel. They had met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions and cheap coffee, and built a relationship on trust, laughter, in the kind of loyalty that promised forever. Daniel was everything Lily had hoped for in a partner: steady, kind, ambitious. He worked as an architect, passionate about designing buildings that would one day shape skylines. Lily herself was a teacher at the local elementary school, known for her gentle patience with children. Together, they seemed unstoppable, a couple built on love, not power. But there was one shadow that never left Lily's heart: Daniel's mother, Margaret. From the very first meeting, Margaret had made her feelings clear. She didn't think Lily was good enough. Too young, too inexperienced, too plain. Margaret wanted her son with someone polished, someone who fit into the wealthy circles she moved in. "She doesn't belong in our family," Margaret had once whispered to a friend, not knowing Lily overheard. "She's sweet, yes, but sweet doesn't last. Daniel needs more than that. He needs someone strong, someone equal." Lily never told Daniel what she heard. She didn't want to burden him or create a wedge between mother and son, but the words had stayed with her, sharp and heavy, tucked into the corners of her heart. Now, on her wedding day, Margaret's disapproval seemed to hang in the air like perfume too strong to ignore. The ceremony had been beautiful, simple, heartfelt, and filled with tears of joy. Lily's friends and family had gathered, her dress had shimmered in the sunlight, and Daniel's vows had made her cry in front of everyone. For a moment, I thought, maybe Margaret will see how real this is. Maybe she'll finally accept me. But the reception was where everything began to crumble. The ballroom was decorated with roses and candles, the table set with crystal glasses and gleaming silver. Laughter filled the air as guests mingled, champagne flowed, and waiters carried trays of hors d'oeuvres across the room. Lily was just about to sit beside Daniel at the head table when Margaret appeared, her hand resting possessively on her son's arm. "Oh, Lily," she said in a tone sweet enough to rot sugar, "we've had a little change in seating. I thought it would be better for everyone if you joined the staff in the kitchen for a while. They could use a hand with serving." The words hit Lily like a slap. At first, she thought she had misheard. The guests around them chuckled, thinking Margaret was making a joke. But Margaret's smile didn't soften. Her eyes glittered with satisfaction. "She's always been so humble," Margaret continued, her voice carrying just enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Why not let her do what she does best? Help, rather than pretend to lead." The laughter grew uncomfortable. Some guests looked away, others tried to smile as though it were harmless banter, but Lily's cheeks burned crimson. She wasn't being teased, she was being humiliated. Daniel turned to his mother, shock etched across his face. "Mother, that's enough." But Margaret squeezed his arm and shook her head as if she knew better. "Darling, this is for appearances. People will understand. A young bride needs to know her place." Lily felt the room spin. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into her dress. But instead, she found herself ushered, actually ushered toward the back doors of the ballroom. A waiter opened the door politely, clearly uncomfortable, and in the next moment, Lily stood in the kitchen, surrounded by clattering dishes and the smell of food, her wedding dress glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. She stood there, frozen, while the cooks and servers stared at her in silence. No one knew what to say. In that moment, Lily realized her worst fear had come true. Margaret hadn't just disapproved of her quietly. She had made her humiliation public on the day that was supposed to be Lily's happiest. And as the laughter of the ballroom echoed faintly through the walls, Lily's heart broke. But she had no idea that before the night was over, someone else would rise and turn the entire room against Margaret. The kitchen staff didn't know where to look. Some dropped their eyes to the floor, others busied themselves with trays and dishes, pretending they hadn't seen a bride in her white gown standing among them. The silence pressed down on Lily until her chest ached. She tried to smile, just a small, shaky smile, hoping to ease their discomfort. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I'll just stay here a moment." But it wasn't okay. She could still hear the faint bursts of laughter drifting in from the ballroom, the muffled sound of music playing, and her mother-in-law's voice rising above the rest. "She's not used to events like this," Margaret was saying loudly enough for everyone near the doors to hear. "Sweet Lily, bless her heart, feels more comfortable out of sight. She never liked the spotlight." The words stabbed into Lily like daggers. They weren't true. She hadn't hidden herself. She had been forced there. But the way Margaret said it, with her tone dripping in false kindness, made it sound believable. To the guests who only half listened, it would seem like Lily had chosen this, that she was shy, overwhelmed, perhaps even embarrassed of herself. A roar of laughter followed Margaret's comment. Lily pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the delicate lace of her gown tremble under her touch. Her throat tightened, her eyes burned. She wasn't part of her own wedding anymore. She had been reduced to a joke. In the kitchen, one of the waitresses, a young woman not much older than Lily, took a timid step forward. "Ma'am, you don't belong here. You should be out there with your husband." She tried to answer, but her voice cracked. My mother-in-law," she couldn't finish. The tears pushed at the edges of her resolve, threatening to spill. Before she could compose herself, the doors swung open again. A few guests had wandered close enough to peek inside, drawn by the spectacle. One man chuckled, pointing at Lily as if she were part of some ridiculous skit. "Look at that," he whispered to his companion. "The bride in the kitchen. What a story to tell." Lily's cheeks flamed. She wanted to vanish into the floor. Meanwhile, Margaret's laughter carried from the head table, louder, sharper, meant to cut. "You see," she called, glass raised high, "not every bride belongs at the center of attention." This time, the laughter wasn't as warm. Some guests chuckled nervously, unsure if they should. Others frowned, whispering among themselves, beginning to sense that something wasn't right. But no one stood up. Not yet. Daniel tried again to intervene, his voice strained. "Mother, please stop this. You're embarrassing her." But Margaret patted his arm as if he were still a child. "Nonsense. It's tradition for brides to be humble. She'll learn." Lily clenched her fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to burst into that ballroom and shout the truth, but her voice felt trapped in her chest, heavy with years of being told she wasn't enough. And so she stood there, humiliated, her gown catching flecks of flour from a nearby counter, while the biggest day of her life slipped further from her hands. She didn't know it yet, but among the guests, someone else was watching, someone who had seen enough. And before the night ended, Margaret would regret every word. Back in the ballroom, the music had resumed, but the laughter hadn't fully returned. The air was different now, thicker, heavier. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting toward the kitchen doors, as if the spectacle of the bride being sent away still lingered there. "Can you believe it?" whispered a woman at the nearest table, her fan flicking nervously. "The poor girl, in the kitchen while the party goes on." "Maybe she asked for it," another replied with a shrug. Some brides are shy, and Margaret is, well, Margaret. She always knows best. But not everyone was convinced. At another table, a younger cousin frowned, lowering her voice. No one chooses to spend their wedding in the kitchen. That was cruel. Did you see her face? The whispers spread like wildfire, leaping from table to table, dividing the room. Some laughed it off as a harmless joke, others defended Margaret, but more and more began to question what they had witnessed. At the head table, Margaret basked in the attention. Her smile was wide, her pearls catching the light. She lifted her glass again, as though nothing at all was wrong. To tradition, she announced, and to brides who know their place. This time the applause was scattered, hesitant. A few clapped politely, but many exchanged uneasy glances. The cruel edge in Margaret's voice was too sharp to ignore. Daniel sat rigid, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists on the tablecloth. He wanted to stand, to shout, to bring Lily back, but Margaret's hand gripped his arm like a vice. "Don't make a scene, darling," she hissed under her breath. "You'll thank me later." But Daniel's eyes burned with anger. "This isn't your wedding," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Across the room, a man shifted in his chair. Ethan, an older family friend who had known Margaret for years, watched the scene unfold with grim silence. His gaze had followed Lily when she was ushered away, and now it lingered on Margaret, sharp and unyielding. He had seen her cruelty before. He had stayed silent for too long. But tonight, something in him stirred, a sense that enough was enough. Ethan wasn't the only one unsettled. At a nearby table, an aunt leaned closer to her husband. "I knew Margaret could be difficult, but this, on her son's wedding day? She's crossed a line." Her husband nodded grimly. "She thinks she owns that boy. But people are watching now. She's making enemies, not friends." In the kitchen, Lily sat on a small stool, hands clasped tightly in her lap, tears streaking her cheeks. She could still hear faint bursts of laughter from the hall, but now they sounded hollow, uncertain. The whispers were growing louder. She didn't know it yet, but her humiliation had become the talk of the entire room. And among the noise, a storm was building. Ethan pushed his chair back, his decision forming with each passing second. Margaret might control her son, she might silence the timid, but she would not silence him tonight. The ballroom didn't know it yet, but the tide was about to turn. The ballroom had grown restless. Conversations overlapped in hushed tones, forks clinked nervously against plates, and the music that played in the background no longer covered the unease. Guests stole glances at the head table, where Margaret sat tall, her smile stretched too wide, her confidence just beginning to crack. Daniel hadn't touched his glass. His eyes were on the kitchen doors, his thoughts on Lily. Every second she stayed hidden burned like fire in his chest. He shifted in his chair, ready to rise, but Margaret's hand pressed down on his arm again. Her grip was iron. "Sit, darling," she whispered, low and sharp. "You'll embarrass us both." The word embarrass cut deep, as though the humiliation was Lily's fault, not Margaret's cruelty. And then a chair scraped loudly against the floor. All eyes turned. Ethan Ward, a man in his mid-50s with steady shoulders and eyes that had seen too much, rose slowly to his feet. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and walked toward the stage where the microphone stood waiting for the next toast. The bandleader blinked in surprise. "Sir." Ethan held up his hand. His movements were calm, but his expression was grave. He reached for the microphone, and when his voice carried through the speakers, the chatter of the room died instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone steady but edged with steel. "Forgive the interruption,
But I cannot stay seated tonight. Not after what we've all just witnessed. Margaret stiffened. Her painted smile faltered as dozens of heads turned toward her. Ethan continued, his gaze sweeping the crowd. We came here to celebrate love, to celebrate Daniel and Lily's union. And instead, what have we seen? A bride, humiliated, pushed aside, treated as if she were less than human, on her own wedding day. Whispers rippled through the room, sharper now, less forgiving. Some guests nodded, others folded their arms. Margaret's voice sliced through the air. That's enough, Ethan. You have no idea what you're talking about. Ethan turned, fixing her with a stare that froze her words. No idea, he said, his voice louder now. I've known you for 20 years, Margaret. I know the way you control, the way you manipulate. I've watched you twist truth into performance just like you tried tonight. But this time, it's gone too far. The guests gasped, heads swiveling between them. Margaret rose slowly, her chair screeching against the floor. Sit down, she hissed, her mask of politeness gone. This isn't your place. But Ethan didn't back down. He looked around the hall, at every guest, every family member, every friend who had witnessed the cruelty. If no one else will say it, I will. Lily deserves respect, not ridicule. And Margaret, it's time the truth about you is finally spoken aloud. A hush fell so heavy that even the band stopped shifting behind him. Margaret's eyes widened, panic flickering beneath her anger. She knew what was coming. And for the first time all night, Lily, still waiting in the kitchen, was no longer the one on display. All eyes were on Margaret.
For a moment, the room was so silent that the sound of glasses settling on tables seemed deafening. Margaret's eyes darted across the crowd, her smile stretched into something brittle, desperate. Ethan, she said, her voice sharp but shaking at the edges, you're out of line. This is my son's wedding, not a stage for your bitterness. Ethan didn't flinch. He held the microphone like a man holding truth in his hands. No, Margaret. This is the stage, because for years, you've played the role of perfect mother, perfect hostess, perfect protector, but I know the truth. And tonight, so will everyone else. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Guests leaned closer, unwilling to miss a word. Daniel's face paled, his hand tightening around the edge of the tablecloth. Margaret's voice rose, frantic now. Don't you dare! Don't you spread lies in front of my family! But Ethan cut across her. His tone is sharper, stronger. Lies? Do you want me to start with the accounts you hid? The debt you buried under your husband's company name? Or the way you begged me years ago to cover for you when everything nearly collapsed? The whispers exploded into chaos. People turned to each other wide-eyed, whispering names, figures, fragments of old rumors. It was like a wound reopening in front of them. Mark's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. Mother, his voice cracked, disbelief turning quickly into anger. Is this true? Margaret shook her head furiously. No, he twists everything. I did what I had to do. But Ethan's voice boomed through the speakers. What you had to do was protect yourself. You didn't care who paid the price, not your husband, not this family, and certainly not Daniel. And tonight, when you shoved Lily into the kitchen, when you tried to humiliate her in front of all of us, it wasn't just cruelty. It was proof of what you've always been, a woman who destroys others to hide her own shame. The room erupted again, shocked voices, muttered accusations, the sound of chairs scraping as people shifted uneasily. Margaret's mask was crumbling before them all. She slammed her hand against the table, her pearls rattling violently. Enough! You have no proof! Ethan's jaw tightened. I kept the proof, Margaret. The documents. The bank statements. I saved them not for revenge, but in case the truth ever needed to come out. And now, it has. Gasps filled the air once more. Margaret's composure broke. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the table for balance. For the first time in years, she had no words left, no power to twist the moment in her favor. Daniel stood slowly, his face a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Mother, how could you?
All these years, and tonight, of all mights, you don't get to speak for me anymore, and you will never speak for Lily again." Applause broke out. Tentative at first, then stronger, building into a wave that filled the hall. People turned to Lily's empty chair as though honoring her an absence, a silent acknowledgement that she was the one wronged, not the one to be ridiculed. Margaret sank back into her seat, her head bowed, her power gone. She looked smaller than she ever had, swallowed by the weight of her own secrets. And as Ethan set down the microphone, the truth echoed through the ballroom, louder than any toast. Margaret had lost.
The ballroom hummed with tension. Margaret sat collapsed in her chair, her face pale, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. For the first time, the woman who had always commanded every room looked powerless, stripped of the grandeur she wore like armor. The doors to the kitchen creaked open. Heads turned instantly. Lily stepped out slowly, her white gown glowing beneath the chandeliers, her eyes red from tears, but steady now. A hush fell across the room, every gaze fixed on her, the bride who had been hidden away, humiliated and mocked. For a heartbeat, Lily froze. She could feel her chest tighten, the memory of laughter echoing in her ears. But then she saw Daniel rise to meet her, his hand reaching, his eyes filled with pride and pain. And she realized she was not walking into shame, she was walking into victory. Daniel took her hand, lifting it gently as though she were made of glass. "You don't belong in the kitchen," he said firmly, his voice carrying through the hall. "You belong here, with me, always." Applause broke out, stronger now, sweeping across the room. Guests stood, clapping, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Lily's voice trembled at first, but she forced herself forward, stepping to the microphone. "I never wanted a fight tonight. All I wanted was to celebrate love with the man I chose and the family I hoped to join. But instead, I was pushed aside, as if I didn't matter." She glanced toward Margaret, whose eyes burned with fury, but who said nothing. "But tonight has shown me something else. I don't need everyone's approval to know my worth. I don't need to fit into anyone's perfect image. I am Daniel's wife. I am part of this family, and I will not be silenced." The room erupted again. Cheers, clapping, voices calling her name. Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You were always strong," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Now everyone else knows it too." In the corner, Ethan gave her a firm nod, as if to say, "It's over. You've won." Margaret tried once more, her voice trembling. "This isn't how it was supposed to be." But no one listened. Her power had crumbled. Her audience was gone. The band began to play softly again, and Daniel led Lily onto the dance floor. The guests surrounded them, clapping, smiling, lifting their glasses. As Lily rested her head against Daniel's chest, she felt the weight of humiliation lift from her shoulders. The day had started with pain, but it would end with triumph. Because in the end, love had spoken louder than cruelty. And Lily knew one thing with absolute certainty. Margaret might have tried to ruin her wedding, but she would never, ever ruin her marriage.